In April 2014, the Board of Education voted to ratify an ad hoc committee to research and collect information on best practices for the superintendent search and provide their findings to the full board. Since that time, the board has held multiple discussions in open meetings each month and taken several actions, including the release of 2 RFQs to procure a search firm. I want to remind the audience and the viewing public that they can track the superintendent's search process by visiting the district's website. On December 8th, 2014, the board held a committee of the whole meeting to discuss the consideration of sole bid responder for RFQ 15-26R for superintendent search firm. After a robust discussion, the board was in consensus to invite Proact Search to participate in an interview with the board in an open meeting. Today, we have Mr. Gary Solomon, CEO of Proact Search. Mr. Solomon will make a presentation for the board, and I invite my fellow board members to ask their questions as we flow through the presentation. Mr. Solomon, I will now turn the meeting over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you very much for having me here. My name is Gary Solomon, and I am the CEO of Proact Search, and I am very proud to be here representing our firm tonight to speak to you about the very important challenge, which is your next superintendent search. I have prepared 4 documents for your review. I apologize for the paper overload that you may have in front of you. One is a brief executive summary of the very lengthy RFP response that we provided to the district. The second is a sample of our work nationwide with large, complex organizations that have utilized a sub-search committee of sorts and other districts that we've worked in that have not. I then provided some draft stakeholder or community engagement plans that we've used in other national searches of urban, complex, large organizations for your review. And then the last document that's pretty and in color is the one I just gave you, and I put that together as a discussion tool based upon the board meeting that I watched that you had last week, where you had some questions and some comments and concerns that went around about Proact Search. And I put that together as a discussion tool for us today as I understood your discussion to be. Again, each of these documents are meant to be a discussion tool, and I'll leave far more time for questions than I do during the formal presentation, because I assume that you saw our RFP response and have asked questions of one another up until that point. Mr. Chairman, does that sound like an okay plan?
That's fine with me. Any an additional discussion? Go right ahead.
All right,
Mr.
fantastic.
Solomon.
Proact Search has been around since 1995. We do work only in large, complex K-12 organizations. We are not a public entity search firm that does work with park districts and city organizations or state-level organizations, although we've done state commissioner searches for public education. Our business is K-12 education with student populations greater than 25,000 kids. We don't aspire at Proact to do the most searches in the country. You'll see other firms across the landscape that do 10 or 20 or even more than that many searches at one time. We believe we should dig deeply in with our district partners, and so we do a very limited subset of superintendent searches a year by design. That being said, we have some very strong beliefs that are outlined in our mission statement on page 2 of your presentation. And rather than read it to you, I want to point out some key beliefs that we have as an organization. Number 1, we want to create a transparent, inclusive process. By transparent, I mean you as a board and each one of your community members involved in the school district, whether formally or informally, should be informed and well aware of what's happening in the search process throughout the entirety of the search. Not just the board, not direct supporters of the school district or direct employees of the school district, but everybody in the educational community that is your county should be informed of what's going on in the process, when it's going to happen, how it's going to happen, where it's going to happen, and why it's going to happen. We also believe at Proact in a very inclusive process. What we've done for the past 20 years is set up infrastructures internally to engage communities in a superintendent search. You're going to hear a lot about fit in candidates throughout the search process. And one of the things we do to ensure fit is create an inclusive process where you as board members individually and you as a school board entirely are actively and consistently engaged in the process so we could best determine by your definition of fit what that definition is. As importantly, though, it's critically important for every search to include their community, and not just subsets or pockets of the community, not just the parts of the community who are involved in the day-to-day activity of schools. I think school community engagement is the most difficult thing facing our principals and our teachers and our school communities overall. We have to, as a search firm, be aggressive in our stakeholder engagement and our community engagement activities to get a flavor for the entirety of the community, not just subsets of the community. So at Proact, we believe that we need to do a diversified and intense community engagement set of activities that really challenges and gives the opportunity to the community to get involved. The worst thing that we could hear in any search that we do is that somebody, whether it's a single person or a group or organization or a subset of constituents, that they had something to say but they didn't have a forum to say it. So our stakeholder engagement is robust, it's rich, it's deep, it's extensive, and we'll work with you individually as board members, and we'll work with you collectively as a board to identify the individuals, the groups, the organizations, and the people that we should be talking to get a flavor for what the community wants in the superintendent. There are some states that don't allow for that. There are some states and opportunities to do search that don't demand public engagement of their superintendent search process. And we feel very strongly that that puts a very big target on the back of perhaps the Board of Education, but certainly the superintendent, because we believe everybody who has something to say about the next superintendent should be invited to say it. So we would do a diverse slate of activities to get people involved and to challenge and encourage people to be involved in the search process. So transparency and inclusivity. That being said, we also believe we need to provide an equitable experience for candidates. We think every candidate who considers this is a great opportunity for them, and there will be many. We think we need to create a fair and equitable process for all applicants, whether they're local, regional, or national, and put everybody through a like set of activities to get to the best people who are a good fit for the school board and the general community. As I said, if you turn to page 3 of our presentation, we're a national search firm. We're based out of Chicago. I thank you first and foremost for your weather. We're not blessed with such great weather in Chicago today, so I appreciate the opportunity to come on down for a little bit. Proact has done work in this area, in the greater Southeast area, throughout the Northeast corridor, throughout the Midwest, the South, and the Pacific Northwest. We are a national firm that believes our responsibility for every search that we do is to create a diverse slate of rich and talented candidates for the school board and the school district community to consider for their next superintendent. On page 3, you have a sample of our work. One of the things I'm most proud of, and if there's any slide that I want to call attention to that I hope you all take a deep look at, is slide number 4. The average lifespan of a superintendent, according to the American Association of School Administrators and the Council of Great City Schools, is between 2.5 and 3.1 years, depending on the type of school district that it is. 2.5 years of the average lifespan of a superintendent. I'm very proud of the fact that 46 of the school superintendents that we've placed since 2003, over 50% of them are on their second contract and still in their position. In the last 5 years, almost 90% of our placements have lasted for greater than 3 years and outlived their first contract. I think what's critically important to a school district and to schools and to principals and teachers is consistency of leadership. I think consistency of leadership calms the organization and provides a purpose and a mission that teachers and principals and parents and community members could get behind. And if we could do something as a search firm to lend to a greater stay in the superintendency, I think that's one of our responsibilities. People ask us all the time as a firm, how do you judge your success or failure? And I think the answer to that is twofold. Number one, a successful placement is somebody who's a good fit as defined by the community and the school board. I think that's the easy part of the answer. The real part of the answer is how that superintendent does over time. So we don't know success, or the greater part of success, until the superintendent and the Board of Education, the community, engages in the work. And only then can we truly define our success. And I think that the fact that our superintendent placements are sticking in their districts and doing well and trending academically, operationally, and financially in the right directions speaks to our ability to get to the right fit candidates. I'm going to skip over page 5 a little bit. There's just a little bit of anecdotal information from board members that we've worked with and candidates and placements that we've made. But I want to talk about the team that will lead your search. I, as the Chief Executive Officer for the company, will be the single point of contact for the Board of Education throughout the duration of the search. I'll work hand in hand with the Board of Education and the community at large in identifying the traits, characteristics, and skill sets and experience that you want in your next superintendent, and I will work heading up your community engagement, which we'll get to talk about in a moment. I will also lead recruiting efforts locally, regionally, and nationally, but I don't want to give you the impression that this is not the work of the entirety of the company. You will have a team of between 5 and 7 people on site throughout the duration of the search. By doing rich, intensified, diversified community engagement, it takes a team to do. We will have 3 to 5 people here working with me throughout stakeholder engagement and community involvement to really engage your community and get the feedback you want and the traits and characteristics of your next superintendent. We also have an internal team, once the recruiting happens, to screen and vet candidates against some criteria that we define as a partnership and your community identifies in their communications with us, by which we vet candidates. Just so you all know, from a board member's perspective, we average about 80 candidates per search that we work on at the superintendent level. And that number sounds statistically valid, but I want to caution you that we internally don't think that it is, because you just need one superintendent. If we get 80 applicants, it sounds like a good number, but it's really, it's misleading. I say that because probably about 30 applicants per search that we do, no matter the size and the shape of the school district, will apply for the position. People are looking for a superintendency. What we want to focus is on people who are looking for your superintendency. So we'll get about 80 candidates, and then by the end of the process, through an internal mechanism or mechanisms that we have developed over 20 years, you will get the top 8 to 10 candidates delivered to you as a board for discussion. And what we hope to do with that 8 to 10 people is have a diverse slate of talented leaders that you as a board and you as a community could really invest dialogue into and gain consensus behind as a school organization and as a school community. The next 4 slides I'm going to talk about generally, and then I'm going to dig in specifically about community engagement, which is the blue handout that I gave you when you first sat down. Our process is very rich in a number of different phases. What we'll do to kick off the search is we'll meet collectively with the board and collectively with community groups as identified by the Board of Education. But as importantly as that, we'll sit down one-on-one with each one of the board members, because we want to hear as a firm what you believe globally as a Board of Education, and then we want to hear individually what you're looking for in your next superintendent. Traits, characteristics, skill sets, wants and needs in your next superintendent. The next part of the search, after we talk to the board globally and the board individually, is we're going to work with you to do a rich stakeholder engagement activity. Now, I took the liberty, if you look at the presentation that I gave you last, it's with the 3 blue boxes along the top in a separate handout. I spent a lot of time going over your board meeting and your last discussion of the board agenda last time. And what I tried to do is put together a very early, proactive draft of, based on the conversation that I heard among board members during your last public board meeting, what I think could be a structure that works for DeKalb County. Now, that being said, this is just my interpretation of the discussion. And I noticed that the conversation went from one side of the board to the other side of the board, where some people brought up a search committee or the merits of a committee or having a particular role for a search committee. And what I tried to do is create a draft of what I think might be a hybrid idea for you to consider. Here's my fear with the search committee, and I'm sure I'm going to get questions about Atlanta, so I want to address them a little bit proactively. One of the things I discuss with boards and communities all the time is my fear about a search committee that wants to have hiring authority over the superintendent. Search committees, which we've worked robustly with across the country, I think it's important for candidates to know that the Board of Education is ultimately going to be the hiring agent of a superintendent, as they're going to be the evaluation agent of the future superintendent. If there's a committee that has a role that's inclusive and representative of the community, that's consistently and actively involved in the process, I think that's fantastic, because every community voice needs to be heard. I think it's critically important to the depth and quality of candidates, though, that the Board of Education is the ultimate hiring agent, interviewer, and decision maker about the talent that's going to be brought forth to the district. So what I've suggested to you is a kind of a hybrid model for you to consider and discuss amongst yourselves or with me, and that's where the Board of Education, a community engagement liaison group, as well as intensified one-on-one community engagement with groups, organizations, and individuals in your community. So a vast and robust community engagement process that goes on for between 2 and 4 weeks, where we identify a liaison group to be representative of each community, and I do mean all communities. And then we'd also go out into those communities as well. One of the things we see as a challenge with doing community engagement is getting out to where the parents and where the families and where the organizations are. And we're committed to doing that. We'll work out a plan with the Board of Education in conjunction with the community to get out in their communities. Because we hear a lot of times, I wanted to be involved, it was too far, or I wanted to be involved and it was too late, or it was too early, or I had to work, or my son or daughter had the flu. We want to give everybody, and I do mean everybody in your community, the opportunity to get involved in their local constituency, to be involved and have their voice heard in the search process. And I think what we put together is representative of your conversation. So there's a liaison group that we communicate with and involve with in the vetting of candidates. But at the same time, we hear from the greater community at large. And we make it a consistent, ongoing dialogue with not only the Board of Education, but the liaison group as well. Again, I encourage you to take a look at this draft that I put together, and I would welcome any questions you had about that. If I can, I want to jump through to the third, fourth, and fifth stage of the process, recruiting and screening. Recruiting and screening, again, we average about 80 candidates per superintendent search that we do. It's a quiet time for the district. We'll work out application protocols with the Board of Education so that all the applicants who are interested in the position, whether they come to you at the supermarket or stop you at the coffee shop, we put them through a fair and equitable process that we are the quarterback of. And when we recruit, it's generally a quiet time, and we generally need 6 weeks to recruit. After we recruit for 6 weeks, we take about a week to screen candidates and determine the best fit. And after that time, we would present the top 8 to 10 candidates for the Board of Education to consider for a first conversation or interview. We would then work with the Board of Education to draft sample questions for candidates, evaluation rubrics, and tools and resources needed to evaluate one candidate versus another. When we present candidates to you, we very much want to present a 360-degree look at a candidate. Google. A lot of folks think the extent of a search lies with Google. And while I'm a big advocate for public domain searches using whatever search engine that you favor, I think it's a very uncomprehensive look at the depth and quality of a particular leader. So what we try to do is take artifacts and information both in the public domain and that we glean from interviewing and interacting with candidates on a consistent basis throughout the search to prevent a total look at a candidate. And that includes public domain searches, background checks, reference checks, conversations with people who are not referenced, who have had a rich history working with an individual person, looking at state accountability data. It's amazing to me that when we get a resume or an application for somebody applying for a superintendency, it looks like their district has gone from point A to point B in every applicant that we look at. And then when you look at public domain information or what the state accountability website has, it doesn't tell a similar story. And what we don't want with candidates is a surprise for anybody. And so we do a comprehensive look at candidates and even do a third-party leadership assessment as a means of painting an accurate picture and a total picture of a candidate for board members and community members to discuss. After working with the Board of Education and Community on a round or rounds of interviews, we hope to work with the Board of Education and the district representatives on negotiating a superintendent's contract. One of the things that we've seen in the past is Board of Educations will name a candidate and then begin negotiations and have some sort of breakdown during the negotiation phase. I think it's our responsibility to establish parameters, contractual parameters at the start of a search and consistently communicate that with potential candidates all throughout the search so there are no surprises at the end. We hope to be the bridge or the avenue of discussion between district and district representation, as well as the candidate and their representation, because I don't think there's anything worse than naming a superintendent in the public domain and then having negotiations fall down because there were unmet expectations. We think it's our responsibility to marry candidate with expectations to the district, so at the 11th hour, it's a seamless conversation, and it's a very transparent and above board conversation because everybody knows where everybody stands going in. One thing that I want to point out that's a change from our draft RFP proposal that I think came up in the board meeting, we have offered to do our marketing and recruiting costs as part of our fee to do the search. I think somebody questioned how that was an effective business model, and that's an offline conversation that I welcome, but we want to make sure that we're clean and our fee includes all the marketing and recruiting costs that we have. The only additional cost from our fee is whatever candidate travel will be to get to and from the district. People ask me all the time, what are those costs ballparked? Well, time of year, time of travel, it impacts the cost of travel. If you have a local or regional or national candidate, that has impact as well. So we're clear on that. If you have people coming as far as Washington State or Oregon or California, it's obviously going to be more expensive to get here because there's housing and transportation once you get here, as well as air travel to get here. But we'll work with you as a board to mitigate those costs as much as we possibly can so candidates make good decisions about their travel to be cost mindful to the district. Other than that, I want to open the floor up to questions. I am proud to be here. I think Proact could do a great job for you, and I have every confidence that we could deliver a very tight, inclusive, transparent process that involves a great number of your constituents in this process. It's inclusive of your wants as a board individually as well as collectively, and I know we could get a deep slate of talented leaders for you all as a board and a community to consider as your next superintendent. I thank you for that time.
Thank you very much for your report, Mr. Solomon. At this time, we'll entertain questions from the board. Mr. Coleman?
Thank you very much for coming, Mr. Solomon. A couple of questions. So first, this is a very, very good presentation. Your history in doing these types of searches is actually quite comforting to me. Wanted to dig in a little bit on the recruitment and screening and presentation and selection, so that pipeline of process there. You said you tend to surface around 80, what I would assume are kind of legitimate candidates for the position at any given time. Could you talk to me about the process of moving the 80 to the 6 to 12, both internal to Proact, what you do with the board, and then how you would include this kind of liaison group or committee that you referenced?
Sure. The answer is I don't know yet, because we don't have a pre-existing notion what you as a board and the community want, because we haven't listened and learned yet. Now, I watched your board meeting. I've listened. I've followed the local media. I've seen what has been done in the past. I know historically where the district has been. But until I could sit down across from you and say, hey, what are you looking for in a superintendent, and how that fits with the rest of the board and how that fits with the greater community as well, I won't be able to create a screening mechanism or tools to do that. What we do is we use the position profile as the do-all, end-all of everything that we do, because we think it's reflective of what we hear from you individually and then collectively, and certainly from your community at large. We will create an internal rubric to determine fit. Obviously, there's the minimum qualifications and the right cert. You have the right certs and the right number of years experience and the right degree. But that's just the minimum qualifications. I don't think this district needs the minimum qualifications. You need the best leader in the country to see this as a destiny, as the opportunity for them. And we do that by using the position profile and based upon the information we glean from our conversations with you. So we create internal tools and resources to do that, and we'll share them with you once we have that identified, and so you could modify them accordingly. So we're weighing things appropriately and not taking things out of the perspective, so to speak.
Is that, understanding this would be tailored for our particular needs?
John, if you would get a little closer to the mic, it would help. Thank you.
Is this better?
Thank you.
Understanding that this would be tailored to our particular needs, You've done a number of large system searches recently. Could you describe one or two effective ways that you've seen work? Because I know all of us are interested in kind of hearing, some of the best practices that you've seen as well, ways of narrowing that candidate pool, whether that be, Proact brings this group of 12 and then the board or the committee decides whether that's effective, or you work, more hand in hand throughout that process?
Great question. I think to me, what I will advise you as a board and you as a community to look at first is data. Everybody's accountable today. And I think everybody tells a good story about accountability and performance and growth over time. But I think data is the single biggest indicator of success, whether it's a traditional K-12 person or not. There's data points that we could deliver to you that tells a really compelling story. When people ask me what's the most important thing I can include on my resume, put numbers. Show me numbers. Show me when you got there it was here and when you left it was here, and then explain to me your role in that. So that's one of the single biggest things that we do. And I think scalability is critically important as well. People ask all the time, well, I'm a superintendent here. I could be a superintendent anywhere. And that's just not true. The degree of complexity, the degree of scale matters, size matters. It's important to understand ceilings and floors of opportunity and growth. And I think that's another thing that we look at consistently in large organizations is your ability to scale. And that's not to say everybody has led a 105,000 student school system. I get that. But are the things you're implementing scalable? Are your ideas scalable? Do you think to scale? Are you a systems thinker? So we put things together, again, to call out data and then to get scalability. And then I think one of the things you look for is that intangible, about leadership. Because when you talk to people, you have to follow them. We talk a lot about their leadership story. What is their leadership story? And what we're asking is, what would be compelling for the board, the community, the teachers, the students to follow you? And so we have to get that out of them during the process so that we could accurately reflect that to you or represent that to you so that when you sit down with these folks, you get a sense of that as well. That said, it would be our recommendation to bring the top 8 to 10 to you as a board. And what I would hope to do is either interview the totality of those or take a subset of those and have a conversation with, and then figure out what you want to do next step from there. I would suggest going from 8 to 10 to no more than 3 or 4 finalists, and then get your community richly involved in that part. And the reason I'm not suggesting the totality of the community involved in the original screening part is for the sanctity and the integrity of the candidate. We find that people who are leading a school system or a successful leader in whatever walk of life they're in right now, to leave them in the public domain and have them go through an extensive community process from the outset of identifying their name and identity as candidates, put them in harm's way in their current responsibilities. If you think about a search and you take the number 80 that I gave as the number of applicants, 79 people are going to not become the superintendent in the district that we're working on. That means 79 people have to maintain their integrity, their reputation, and their brand in their current job. We need to be mindful of that as a firm because, again, they're only as good as an applicant for the next opportunity they may choose to look at based upon their work and their ability to move the work in their current position. Does that answer your question? Great.
Mr. Mayfield, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Solomon, and great presentation. Appreciate the information. I've got a couple of questions, at least to start.
Sure.
I'm sure as the discussion goes on, there may be more. I guess I want to start first sort of at the 50,000 feet level, if
Sure.
you will, in terms of looking at the context for the most preferred candidate actually being interested in the work. And so that takes into consideration for me the prospect that they'll be looking not only at what you ask them, but they will be taking their own independent look at DeKalb County, the board discussions, et cetera. So I guess my first question would be, what do you think DeKalb needs to present publicly to enhance the prospects of assuring a candidate that they are coming into the right environment?
We spoke to this last time I was with the committee that I met with. Do you know the number of large, complex organizations doing a search right now? It's greater than 25. There are 25 large, complex, some urban organizations looking for great talent to lead their school system today. And it's not even the first of the year. when, usually there's resignations and transiency in school districts. So it's not only how DeKalb County needs to present itself, but it's a competitive landscape. It's because great leaders will have a great number of opportunities, and I often tell folks, in fact, I wrote a book about it, which I think I sent to the district. There are things that a district should do to recruit and put their best foot forward in recruiting talent in a very competitive environment. And I think the first thing is represented by the community engagement plan. It's got to be an inclusive process. I think a lot of times people want to move fast to get a superintendent, and there's a great urgency around the work. I get that. The urgency around the work is never going to go away. But I think you have to take the time to involve your community in a very detailed and a very purposeful way to get their buy-in and support for what you want to do as a Board of Education, and ultimately what that leader is going to want to accomplish as a superintendent. So I think that is a big sign to an applicant, is how involved the community was. And if the community had an appetite for that. Because I hear superintendents say a lot of the times, we just can't get our community involved. And we fight to get our community involved, and it's such a challenge, and we know that's an ongoing issue we have to overcome. I think during the superintendent search process, we need to demonstrate as a community that everybody's invested in it, it's not just the board members. And I think having that in place is a great tool to recruit. Secondly, the sanctity of process. People who are engaged successfully in their work need to know what's going to happen, when it's going to happen, and you talk about on time and on schedule and without surprises. I think to have integrity behind your process and to speak to that process with your community, with your candidates, with your board, with your media, with your internal and external stakeholders, so everybody knows what's going to happen, why it's going to happen, where it's going to happen, and when it's not going to be happening. I think to stay on schedule and the deliverables are met in the timeline that's mutually agreed upon the board and the firm, I think that sends a very clear message to candidates. I often talk about the cohesiveness of a board. One of the things that candidates will do in every search, and the internet is the greatest thing in the world sometimes, and you could watch board meetings, and you could watch board behavior, and you could follow election results, and the good behavior of boards of education, the not so good behavior by boards of education, and the best candidates will ask the most questions about the makeup and the demeanor and the get-alongness, that's not a word, the get-alongness of the board, and they're rallying behind the cause that is public education. So to speak with a collective voice and to buy into the process and to participate actively and be engaged in the process and be thoughtful and mindful of not only the wants and needs of the community, but the wants and needs of the candidates as well, those all send very strong messages to candidates.
Okay. And sort of as a follow-up to that question is whether or not is your opinion or experience that when you do have collaborating stakeholder community committees involved, does the profile of that committee either enhance, detract, or make a difference in terms of how a candidate might perceive the quality of community involvement?
You know, I think as long as the committee is representative of the community, I think you should hear from all sides, and it should create discussion because you want rich dialogue. This is an important position, and there's going to be interests and ideas and thoughts on best practices and experience and skill set, and some people will have an idea our next superintendent should be doing this today, and that's the best candidate for us. And I think it's our responsibility to take that information and create an intersection of talent for you as a board to consider, because you might believe something radically different than you do, sir. And I welcome that discussion. And that's not to say you should be shouting down anybody from a ledge saying my way is the only way. But even if you have that passionate debate, I think it behooves the district. I think to get the ideas out there, to have different ideas. I mean, public education is a never-ending challenge. We haven't created or found the magic bullet, and if you all have, tell me where it is and where I could get one. So the more ideas you throw around, whether they're heated and passionate or you find common ground and consensus, the more deep discussion on what is best for kids, all kids, is a fruitful discussion in my mind. And we hope to guide that discussion.
Second question, ask first a second. I got two questions left. One is, when you, other than sort of the general leadership kinds of things, what do you think are the major components of information or to actually frame what your search should look like? What basic tenets, I guess, with respect to a school district do you think need to be presented to you to frame the criteria, help frame the criteria for the search?
I think there's some very basic questions that we need to know. Makeup of the board, elected, appointed. Some districts that we worked in are a blend of mayoral and state level appointment. When are terms up? What's the size and shape of the board? Is it going to grow or be reduced over time? We worked in Shelby County when they just merged as a school district. There were 23 board members when we started the search. There were 7 when we were done. Candidates would ask me, how many people are on the board? And I honestly, today there are 23. When you're hired, there's going to be 7, I think. And there was legislation going back and forth. So makeup and governance model of the Board of Education is critically important. People will ask us a range of compensation, and they'll ask a lot about what has been done in the past historically, contractually, to ensure their success or their ability to do good work in a district. They'll talk about demographic information of the school district. I think like experience, scalable experience with like populations, candidates are looking for in terms of fit from their end. One of the things that we'll learn from your community when getting out and being aggressive about soliciting input from your community is to get a feel for the community, because one of the things that are intangible and one of the things we very much believe in, I got 3 little kids. If I was going to say, hey, guess what, guys, we're moving, they would say, where? Tell me about it. What do I need to know? Is this a good fit for us? Is there a place for me to grow and learn? Is there a place for me to worship? Are there places for me to find my niche in that community? So it's our responsibility to be able to paint an accurate picture of that, because a superintendency is a thankless 25-hour-a-day, 8-day-a-week job. And so it's a family decision. It's not an individual decision. So we need to be able to paint that as well for a candidate. And I think commitment to public education. I think, heated debate, engaged debate, good candidates, good leaders welcome that. I think they want to see that people are vested in public education and see it as a cause rather than a job.
Final question for now. Just in a brief, concise way, can you describe an experience where you had the most engagement by the community in the selection process, and sort of include in that, what some of the positives and negatives and some of the innovations you use to make it work?
Yeah, I think we came in to do the search for Charlotte right after they won the Broad Prize for Charlotte-Mecklenburg Public Schools, right after they won the Broad Prize for the highest performing urban district in America. When you're told time and time again in every educational publication and on the front page above the fold of your local newspaper that you're the best ever, it's really hard to drum up, hey, you need to be involved in this. And what we did is we tried to create morning, noon, and night opportunities, and we divided across geographic regions of the city, and we took different organizations, different subgroups, different individuals that we met with morning, noon, and night in different type of whole group settings, small group settings, one-on-one settings, to really challenge the community to get involved globally, and we were very successful there. One of the things we also do with search is we find that most people have access to a handheld device of some sort. And so we create the same opportunity via electronic tools and resources. The same questions we would ask at a community engagement forum, we will ask electronically. So if the wheels fall off and you can't get to an event, no matter how localized we make it, people still have an opportunity to use a tablet or a laptop or a desktop computer or even a phone to give their input and get involved in the search that way. So to be creative and flexible and nimble, I think, is critically important. I think also you can't rush it. We're from Chicago. We get snow. We were doing a search that had a great number of stakeholder engagement when it was 50 below zero, which is not uncommon in Chicago. We had 1 person come out. We had 2 people come out. And now the board could have checked the box and said, hey, we offered it. People could have come out. But I think to be locked into a mindset of these are the dates and these are the deadlines, I think that's a false positive. I think what you have to do is be flexible enough to meet parents and families and community members where they are. So to be flexible enough to say, hey, we had an event, but we need to have more, to give them a greater opportunity to be involved. Because ultimately, I think they want to be. They just needed to be given the right opportunity to do so.
Right, and I guess I should have maybe defined that question a little better in terms of stakeholders. I'm really thinking about a stakeholder committee that would be closely working with you.
Okay, the committee. I think a committee serves many, many purposes. Number one, they're representative of the community. And I think if you identify a rich committee that represents all students, I think that's fruitful to discussion. It would be our experience, the best practice of a committee is to involve them on a regular basis throughout the search to get feedback from the community, get questions, comments, and concerns from the community that they could take back to them, and also to involve them in shaping the talent that we're recruiting, because some things will come up after the fact, and to have ongoing opportunity for dialogue is critically important. I think involvement on the front end in shaping the position profile and shaping the wants and needs and skill sets and experience, the committee plays a critically important role. I think at the end of the search process, when you get down to the 3 or 4 finalists, I think the community and certainly the committee should be amply involved and be able to kick the tires, so to speak, on all the finalist candidates so that the community representatives representing the larger groups or the individuals have their voice heard in the process. Now, we've had candidates, as I've explained to other boards of education, at the 11th hour will say, hey, I would rather not go through a public debate of my characteristics because I'm a sitting superintendent or I'm a sitting leader, and it doesn't behoove me to do that. And they often regret suggesting that because the community needs to be involved. And to cut that corner takes the community out of the discussion, and I think they need to be deeply in the discussion. And candidates realize once they do it as well. So I would advocate for a strong committee role in that as well.
Before we have Mr. Campbell, I want to ask the board if you would please limit your questions for the first round to 2 questions, and then we'll be glad to take a second round so that
Nothing personal, y'all.
Talk now. Mr. Campbell, 2 questions.
If you have.
If you have to, and then we'll start around again.
Two or less.
Thank you, Mr. Solomon, for what you've done. This is a great product.
Get closer to the mic if you don't mind.
When you did your discussion, you mentioned transparent and a transparent and inclusive process. Let's talk a little bit, and Thad, Mr. Mayfield has already touched on the community engagement liaison group. Give me some idea, just envision this group. How large, how diverse, how do you strategize? Because what's so important, in my perspective, is that this group embraces the search, that this group is a part of the mouthpiece. They are the mouthpiece of the search. They're in support of. So give me some idea of what you've seen in the past, what you envision this group looking like, composition of this group.
Look at the second page of the handout, the blue boxes. And again, this is just a draft. I don't mean to assume that it's all knowing. But what I would want to do is get representatives from these types of organizations, and we'll get that information from our one-on-one conversations with you and our total conversation with you as a board. But I would involve these types of organizations on that committee and have a liaison or representative of those groups. So we have channels for communication, so we have open and honest dialogue, and they're engaged in the process from the outset to the very end.
This is great. So this, if you were to take one from each unit identified here, you got 14 people. So ideally, you can have as many 14, 15 people on the committee is what you're saying?
I think so.
With that in mind, I like where you incorporate them into the process, that you've gone through the search. I think you said you've narrowed it down to a small subset,
3 or 4.
and then these people help you to communicate to the public at that point in time where you are and what.
I'd actually involve them in the screening process. I think a finalist candidate should have you're not going to get to know a candidate on a single interview or a second interview. I think to put them in diversified environments and have them speak to their leadership story and what they see as their vision for the district and why they're a good fit for the district, I would include the committee and the community at large in the vetting of the finalist candidates, the final 3 to 4 candidates, and perhaps have a candidate spend a day in town each, or a day with partly the board, partly the committee, partly the community, partly different stakeholders around, maybe tour some schools, do some things to get a flavor for the district, the community, and the board.
Okay, part B, because this is a follow-up to that question. What have you experienced challenges here? Because we're going to get lots of help. We got a lot of people that want to help us with the process. I get emails every day about we want to be a part of the process. How do you make certain that this vetting process that's going on here does not signal to the public that we are not on the same page with the search firm?
Well, I think to create an equitable process for everybody, you should be stopped at the coffee shop. You should be stopped in the grocery store. You should be stopped at the health club and say, hey, I have an idea for your superintendent. We welcome that. But I think there should be a process where everybody funnels to go through an identical process. Because what we would hate to have happen is someone stops you at the coffee shop and say, I know somebody who's going to be a great superintendent. That person becomes the superintendent, and then it comes out that the only reason that they're the superintendent is because they happen to bump into you at the coffee shop. So to funnel everybody to a like process, and then be clear on roles and responsibility of the search. I think it's critically important. It's probably the most critical thing to a candidate that the board is actively involved in the hiring and screening process. To give that responsibility to the community or a committee will send red flags up to the candidate, because they'll ask me, I need more interaction with the board. Could you facilitate that? Good candidates will ask as many questions of you as you ask of them. And you want that, because if you're going to find fit, it has to be a two-way communication. And so to have clear roles and responsibilities and hiring authority and clarity of process eases that concern for candidates, yet involves your community in a very organic way.
Mr. Orson, 2 minutes. 2 questions, I'm sorry.
Oh, boy.
Yeah. Good luck on the 2 minutes.
It's getting worse.
I'm going to have to ask, my first question is going to have to be a compound question.
Sure.
But they are related pieces. So it's going to count on one. I'll keep it in an and or an or.
Okay.
Which has to do with what are the searches you're currently doing now?
Mm-hmm.
Bit more flavor of where you and Atlanta parted ways,
Mm-hmm.
and what history you've had with districts, so on one question, with systems that may have just emerged from a crisis.
Sure.
I think that's an important contextual. So that's question one.
This is a long question. I'll give you a bunch of answers with
Okay.
commas. We're currently only doing 2 other superintendent searches right now. One's in South suburban Chicago, where we've just concluded on December 15th recruiting for that. So we're in the process of vetting candidates and whittling down from the number to the number, I think it's 9 to 12, that we're going to present to the board. The second search, which has gotten a lot of national attention, we've just finished recruiting for, is in Ferguson, Missouri, right outside of St. Louis. I'm so proud of the fact we had 129 applicants for Ferguson, Missouri. When we went down and met with the board the first time, you won't get 10, they told us. And we took the challenge, and they've been a great board and a great community to work with. But both those districts were winding down. We have a couple proposals out right now to do additional searches. I think a couple of them were mentioned in your last board meeting. Nothing is carved in stone. Just to further qualify that we don't do the most searches, we've just been invited to do 2 searches nationally and turn them down because we didn't think it would be a good fit for us at the time, and we didn't see the community and board buy-in to the process, and we didn't think we'd be able to do our best job in recruiting, so we've turned those down. But those are both done in recruiting. The stakeholder engagement is done, profile is done. We've had all final applicants come in, and we're in the process of vetting both those. Second part was Atlanta?
Right.
Second part with Atlanta. We mentioned the role of a committee and the concerns or risks about a committee. I think a couple things are important to a community. I mentioned transparency a bunch. I think to bring one sole finalist to a community doesn't allow for the rich discussion that you and I discussed. I think for a board to have passionate debate on the qualifications on a subset of candidates in a very public way is helpful to a community. It builds bridges, it builds discussion, it builds dialogue, and it helps you as a board and the community to get to know candidates. When someone suggests to me, even in Texas where it's the law, that says a superintendent search only has to yield 1 finalist candidate, even in Texas when they allow that as part of a search, we advocate for more public debate of candidates. When you have a committee that also wants to be responsible for hiring a superintendent, it gets a little dicey. There are some issues that a candidate will have on the board that a committee simply can't speak to. You know, what is a board's willingness to talk about this contractually? Or what is a board's willingness to talk about this in terms of an academic agenda? Candidates really need to dig in with the board, and in places where they're not given that opportunities, we have to advocate for our candidates and protect the interests of the families of our candidates by giving them access to the Board of Education and the whole Board of Education to have those discussions.
The last part of that question, so I can get the second question, crisis districts.
You know, we don't work with districts that are not in some form of crisis. We simply don't. You know, large, urban, complex organizations, public education is a fight. You got to scratch and battle every day. In St. Louis, they lost their accreditation, and we've done 2 consecutive searches with them, and their latest superintendent, Dr. Kelvin Adams, is on his 3rd contract there, and they're 7/8 towards accreditation now, and I think at the end of this academic year, they will be fully accredited. And there was a 3-person state-appointed board when we came in and did that search, and we successfully navigated that. I think other districts have been over state takeover. We did extensive work with the Recovery School District, which was created out of crisis. We've done extensive work with districts that had lost public faith and had a crisis of confidence. And by bringing in a bridge builder, a consensus builder, someone to get out and work with the community on the cause that is public education, that's where we live.
So my second question, which actually ties into your answer,
Sure.
about how the sort of the end part of this process. Seems to me that there's an important area for discussion. At a personal level, at a personal level, I feel uncomfortable with what I call the beauty pageant approach,
Sure,
to,
absolutely.
which is when you bring in more than one sole finalist, and it sounds to me that was perhaps the point of divergence between you and the Atlanta committee about what that end game was going to look like. Because my understanding is that Atlanta, the final search firm, delivered 9, 10 candidates to the board, which then sifted through to get to a sole finalist. I worry, and some of it's steeped in our history, and some of it is steeped in the risk to running candidates off who don't necessarily want to go through a process that they don't know that at least they're the sole finalist. I mean, I grew up in Florida, which has that process for university presidents, and they have lost candidates at times who, you sort of expose yourself that you're looking, and all of a sudden your current employer thinks, hell, they're looking. We need to be looking. And we'll have to decide that. But because clearly it was a point of divergence between you and Atlanta, it could, and we've got to discuss it, be a point of not disagreement, but philosophical difference between us and you if we were to hire you. How comfortable are you then working in an environment if we decided we wanted to go to a model of a sole finalist? And can you give us examples of where you have done searches like that?
Dallas, Austin, we've done it repeatedly
Okay.
when asked. I think, again, that passionate debate is critically important. And I would argue also that a board going to one candidate is different than a committee going to one candidate. It's vastly different. So,
Right, but Atlanta didn't have their committee go to one candidate. I mean, they delivered.
But in some cases, it has
Right.
been. So as long as there's the rich discussion to some degree on the Board of Education, I think that's the richness of the search.
Dr. Carter?
And I was going to ask all the panelists, can y'all hear Dr. Solomon or Mr. Solomon when he turns his head in the other direction?
I'll keep it here. Sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And board members, speak into the mic, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Corley.
Thank you so much for laying out your thoughts and ideas about how we engage the community in the process. I just want to make sure that we are clear because there was some fuzziness when you started responding to Mr. Campbell, one of them down there, with regard to timing. Just to reiterate, the stakeholder engagement that you were suggesting for the in-depth is on the back end, not the vetting of the 80 on the front end. Is that correct?
Correct. What I would
Okay, I
suggest,
need you to say that again. I'm sorry.
What I would suggest for community engagement is a rich engagement on the front end where you define skill sets, characteristics, experiences, critical wants and needs in the next superintendent. So engage them in creating the position profile by which you would recruit. We then internally would go from a larger number to the top 8 to 10 and present that to the Board of Education, where we would suggest the Board of Education interviews a subset or all of those, and then involve the community in vetting the final subset 3 or 4.
Great. I just want to make sure that that was clear because it was a little fuzzy when you started into the explanation, and I don't want people to have mis-expectations.
Sure. I appreciate that.
Along that same thought, one of the things that's important, and you've talked about it, and in your profile, you've identified that you worked with Baltimore City Public Schools and bring in Alonzo, and we know that he is just a national phenom. And the challenges that they had were greater than the challenges that we've experienced here in DeKalb County. So that gives you some good rubber for the road.
He's a neat guy. He's a neat guy.
But that process was also one that I think gives you guidance to help us. How do you see Proact helping the board get the community up to speed in understanding role, responsibility, engagement, transparency, what that means and what it doesn't mean? To the extent that you've laid out how they would be engaged, I think we've protected candidates, and I've heard you say that again and again, that we owe that, particularly if we want to recruit the most outstanding people possible. But I think it's also important for us to have a clear message in helping the community understand how this is going to occur. How do you see Proact framing such?
I think that's part of our one-on-one dialogue with each individual board member, and it's a greater conversation with your district communication department, and it's a conversation with the committee as well. I think to be upfront and honest and open with everybody from the outset on roles, responsibilities, timelines, expectations, and meet those expectations and meet the timeline on schedule with accountable deliverables is critically important. But we would work to shape that message with the Board of Education, with the district, with your local media, so that everybody was clear on what their roles, responsibilities, and what their expectations as the search rolled out was.
Okay, so that's shaping it, but then it's getting it out there so that people are clear that they're hearing the same information.
And I
Can you
think
say a little bit more about that?
I think consistency and proactive communication is important, because what we find sometimes is the stakeholders or community members didn't know they were supposed to do, and I think that's what you're getting at. I just didn't know I was supposed to be there. And what we want to do is take advantage. You have a fantastic website set up. I think it's the middle of your homepage on your district website. And I think we should take advantage of your communication department and your social media. I think you have an app that you guys have built out. So different means of communication, newsletters, principal messages to the communities, having teachers send something home with their kids. The more ways you could aggressively get at communication to alert people of the responsibility and opportunity to be involved in the process. Take advantage of every infrastructural means you have to communicate guidelines for getting involved with every stakeholder in the district.
And then, Dr. Johnson, that was an A and B.
Thank you.
So, 2. Slide 7, Robert, if you can pull that up. The phase, I clarified it was an A and B. Slide 7, phase 1 through 5, total expected time 9 to 15 weeks, 3 to 5 months. Given the complexities that you have already identified for this district and the demand for engagement and the competitiveness that's out there, you said 25 plus, but realistically we know it's closer to 40. Where do you see this 3 to 5 month process being? I mean, how do we help the public, because they're anxious, they want it done before the superintendent leaves, but how do we help the public and this board manage expectations of what is reasonable so that this is an effective search if it does not happen in that 9 to 15 week time frame? That's the general big picture idea.
Sure. So the 3 to 5 months. Community engagement and recruiting is an organic process, and it's an inexact science. There's a science to it, and there's a rhythm to it. There's a search season to it. There's a good time to recruit and a bad time to recruit, and an active time for communication and dialogue, and there's not. What we've outlined is what our norms are for the timeline of the search. And what I'm going to piece together, and I started to work on this before I walked in, is to give kind of a month-by-month breakdown of what's going to happen in every stage of the search. And I think to put that out there will create a great degree of transparency for not only the board members, but the community. And I started to do that, and I'll finish up, and that's an artifact I could provide for the board chair after this. But to outline on not week by week's a little bit minute, but a month by month, this is what's going to happen. And to also call out quiet times. Recruiting is a quiet time in the community, but I think it's a critical time. But to know that, to expect that, and there's not a community role in that, so to speak, other than to funnel candidates through a particular funnel. But I think to get that out there early and often by every means of communication will maintain expectations and inform your community overall. And at the same time, inform candidates, because timing matters to candidates as well. You know, it's going to be budgets. You don't like to hear that. It's budget season always, but, you know, it's budget season for superintendents and leaders in K-12 organizations, and there's decisions that have to be made on resource allocation and staffing and those sorts of things. And those start coming up in very real timelines. And so what we'll do is put something together that kind of meets the board and your community where they want to be, that we think is an effective time to recruit as well. You're right in the heart of it. I think there.
What was the question again for people listening out in TV land?
He mentioned that there is a right recruiting season, and the question is, are we in it? Have we missed it? Where are we in that time frame? And when does it really end?
Thank you.
With today's search world, it doesn't end. But think of it as a building principal. I break everything down to my son and daughter's building principal. It's not opportunity to leave in October or November because you just started school. So to search for the next 3 to 6 months, even if it's 6 months, gives you ample time to find the right talent, and it's a seamless break in their current position without causing a disruption of leadership there. They could communicate amply and give them enough time to do what they need to do. So yeah, you're right in it. Now, that being said, districts announce vacancies and departures all the time. So there are people that are hiring right now for like a December 31st start. It's not ideal for some districts, but now certainly is.
Thank you, Dr. Carter. Dr. Irwin, 2 questions, followed by Dr. Marley. The outline part of questions, we hope that you will refrain from just 2 questions.
I can't do a compound question.
Letter Z.
First of all, I want to thank you, Ms. Solomon, for your presentation. And I only have one question. Could you kind of go through some strategies on how Proact will work with the board in order to put together the liaison, the community engagement liaison group?
Yeah, I think I gave you my best thinking on that off the top of my head, but clearly there's things I don't know. So to have, what we'll do is send an agenda to the board collectively for a dialogue, and then we'll send an agenda to each one of you as the things to think through. Like, to me, who are the 3 to 5 people I must talk to get a flavor for what we need here? And
I can understand that too, but you have 14 categories that you got to get a flavor for.
Absolutely. And we think we should meet with every single one of them as part of our activities, and not just in one opportunity. And
I understand that too, but as you interview each board member individually, I'm sure not every board member is going to hit all 14 categories. So my question again is, how are you going to cover all these categories?
We want to get a representative sample of what is the best thinking of the board. And if there are individuals that we should talk to one-on-one that don't necessarily fit a representative sample of the board, we will have that offline conversation as well as and engage them as appropriate as well.
All right.
And can I say this? Some people don't want to sit on a committee. They don't. They want to be engaged in a very intimate way, and that's great. It ought to be that. The elected officials are a perfect example. Like, it's hard to coordinate just calendar from a committee perspective. So you want to have an ongoing dialogue with elected leaders in maybe not that environment, but consistently throughout the process.
Right. And I guess my point to that is, as this liaison group is put together, I just don't want the public to get the appearance that there's biases putting this committee together.
Sure. And that's what we'll do, the representative sample. Absolutely.
Thank you, Dr. Irwin. Dr. Marley?
Thank you, Mr. Solomon. That was a wonderful presentation, and the information you provided has been very helpful. And I do agree with a lot that you're saying while this is a national search. One of the things that I have concern about, is sort of piggyback on what Dr. Irwin was saying, is what stopgaps do you have in place to ensure that the Community Stakeholders Engagement Committee, which I'm glad to see this, and I'm so glad to see the different organizations, the different groups that you're willing to look at in order to include them in this whole process. But sometimes when we have someone coming from somewhere else and coming in, everybody wants to be a part of it. What stopgaps do you have in place to ensure that this group doesn't become unmanageable, unwielding, and that the firm doesn't find itself where you probably have found yourself before and being strong-armed into going in a direction that is not the best interest of the DeKalb County School District, and being able to get through this search in maintaining integrity and also not being so politicized that you can't do what needs to be done.
I understand the politics of what we do and how we do it. We have that discussion internally every day. I think, to me, the most important factor of a successful search is getting the right people in the room with the Board of Education and ultimately the community when it comes down to the 4 or 5 finalists. As long as I could accurately represent my candidates to you and make a compelling argument for their candidacy and why this is the job, not a job, but the job for them, and get them sitting where I am in relation to you and enter in that discussion with you, that's the win. I want to put really talented people from all walks of leadership in front of you, and if we could do that and create discussion as a board and involve the community at the same time, that's the win. But in hearing the community, I think is critically important, and the reward far outweighs the potential political risk of it. And as long as we get the candidate or candidates in the room with the Board of Education for those tough questions that they ask of you and you could in turn ask of them, that's the win for us.
But it still goes a little deeper than that, because you're going to probably find yourself in a position where you've been before, that there are going to be people, or maybe that committee, who wants to make that choice of having one, and you believe in 3, and I believe in 3 or so also, that we should be able to have a choice of who we have coming before us, so that we're not just looking at one person. And so how do you plan on handling, and how have you handled that situation in the past?
By trusting the relationship with the Board of Education. It's an interesting dynamic, a board member, a community member versus the Board of Education as a whole. I think the Board of Education as a whole has a responsibility to uphold the best interests of the district and to allow them the opportunity to decide what's best for their constituents and their kids and their schools and their teachers and their principals. Ultimately, the boards are going to make that hard decision, because that's the position they're put into.
Thank you. Finished, Dr. Marley?
Dr. Marley, are you finished, or do you have another question?
Can you give me a little background about the Shelby search and how that all panned out and how you all were able to handle that?
Yeah, it was probably one of the most unique searches we worked on. It was 2 merging school systems. That one was Memphis and the other was Shelby County. They both had sitting superintendents when we started, and by midway through the search, neither one of them had a superintendent. So it was interesting. They went from being considered for the whole district superintendency to moving on to other opportunities. At the same time, the Board of Education went from 23 to 9 to 7 and then back up to 9, so that was an interesting dynamic. And one thing we learned through a rich set of community engagement activities and interactions with a committee and with the full board was that knowing the history of the district and where things have historically happened was of greater value than potentially grand national experience. And so there was an applicant internally that struck me as the right fit for the job at that particular moment. I thought he could be a great advocate for the merging school systems. I thought he could be a great bridge builder towards consensus and really focus attention on all students, not those kids, not these kids. And he's a brilliant young man, and he's from this area, actually. A brilliant young man.
Thank you, Dr. Margley. Mr. McMahon?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Solomon. I'll frame my question by saying it has to do with clarity of communication. And Dr. Carter acknowledged your work with Baltimore City. And I think we are very passionate here in DeKalb about our unique demographics. And I think a lot of times our parents and our community leaders feel very passionately that we are unique and no one else understands. But for some people, like Dr. Carter, we know that we are similar in aspects to different systems, and in times there are systems that are in worse shape than we have been. Part A is, how do you communicate through our public engagement that the candidates that you feel best fit the cab based on their prior experiences, how would you communicate their specific skill set and how their prior experiences would translate into effective leadership in DeKalb? That's part one.
Okay.
Part two is, I think every board member here has, as recently as yesterday, been questioned about perceptions of DeKalb. And we rely on Google searches, newspaper articles to rely on information. And whereas we are in a unique position to understand the behind the scenes, the full comprehensive story, how does Proact, when they identify potential candidates, address their concerns that they have, through their due diligence, found out about DeKalb, and how does Proact potentially dispel those myths and clearly convey what the message is here in DeKalb and bring the best candidate to DeKalb, so they're not still sitting on the sidelines going, I'm not going there.
Sure.
Fair question?
Both of them are. The first question, how do we make a compelling argument for candidates to the community here and to the Board of Education here? I think track record of success. I think working with like populations of and like communities and a demonstrated track record, moving things from point A to point B in a very tangible and logical and obvious way is the first and easiest way for us to do it. One of the things we do as part of our 360-degree look at a candidate is create a data dashboard for you to take a look at. And I was a teacher, so it sounds very school-based, and in fact it is. What we will do is we'll take each candidate and take their past couple or few jobs that they've had and said, here's where they were operationally when they started, here's where they were academically, and here's their role in that. Because some people in the organization who are up-and-coming talent in an organization will stake claim to gains or stability or financial revenue increase, but really had no active role in it. So we'll demonstrate using data the growth and the track record of success and the candidate's role in it. And I think that speaks to all groups of folks. I think data tells a pretty compelling story to both the board and the community, and so that's how we'll begin to shape that conversation with boards and communities. In terms of dispelling myths, I think I tell this to boards all the time, and it sounds cliche. You guys are so engaged in the work here as a Board of Education and the struggle that is public education. And I think your superintendent said at the last board meeting, we need to dispel the untruths, and he might have even called them lies. And he said, we have to work from the minute we mention the school district to dispel the rumors and innuendos and lies that are being told about that district. And I think that's our responsibility to candidates. We need to create an accurate portrait of what the opportunity is in DeKalb County. By having the community involvement, by having the one-on-one conversations with boards, having the holistic conversation with boards, gives us avenues to those discussions. One thing that we pride ourselves on, and it sounds cliche again, we're candidate friendly. We will talk to candidates in this search daily, hourly, ad nauseum, electronically, whether it's text or phone or email or video conference or face-to-face. We will be in active dialogue with every one of our applicants and every one of our candidates. And they will ask us questions that we have no idea, but they will pose us an opportunity to get more information from the board. So we will call the board chair and say, sir, we had a question that I have no idea how to answer this. What's the historical context of it? What has been done in the past? What is the vision of the district moving forward? And by having clear channels of communication that aren't a one and done, they're ongoing, they're daily, they're weekly, they're hourly, we could reach back to the Board of Education, we could reach back to the committee and get their input as a committee to get more historical context and be able to paint the most accurate portrayal of a district to a candidate. What we won't do, and what we pride ourselves on not doing, is taking a square peg into a round hole. I think if I create a rosy picture that everything is glorious and every day is going to be, all about the best interests of kids, and have that be the do-all end-all, I don't think that's an accurate portrayal of the reality that is the challenge of your next superintendent. I can't candy coat it. I can't not address key questions by saying I just don't know, or I don't want to know, or we don't have that information. So I think it's critical to establish communication channels to allow for the most accurate information to candidates to tell a good story, a compelling story about the district.
After I make ask a question, Mr. Orson? You're next. Mr. Solomon,
Yes.
Would you explain to us, give us your ideal timeline for that would get the best results for the superintendent search, and your rationale as to why that timeline is best?
Absolutely. I think, first of all, districts try to cut corners a lot because they're worried about getting, somebody asked about the best talent in the country, what's the best time to search? And a lot of times districts will want to cut back recruiting time or cut back on stakeholder engagement or do some things that whittle down a search to get better quality. And that's a false positive as well, because you can't cut a corner. You have to take your time and do it right. I think in my mind, I look at January and February, early February, as the time to engage the committee, engage the community. I think by the end of February, we have, and I'll write this all up for you so you don't have to scribble it down. I think by the end of February, we have a mutually agreed upon position profile and a community engagement report that you could share, that we could share with the board, and you then could share with your community. I think starting the very end of February through the end of March or early April, we would recruit. We would take a couple weeks in April to vet and prepare materials for your consideration, and then start interviewing people at the end of April or early May for a June negotiation with your new superintendent. I think that gives us ample time to recruit. I think there's a couple different events that help your recruiting process within the time frame I've just described. The largest educational conference, the largest gathering of educational talent in the country is the American Association of Administrator Conference that's being held at the end of February in San Diego this year. There's 9,000 superintendents represented in this organization and probably 12,000 members who attend conferences on their behalf. It's a great recruiting environment. There's also the Educational Research and Development Institute that's being held this spring also, that allows for a great gathering of talent across K-12 education. So there's the opportunity to converse and speak with people about the opportunity in that window that I described.
Thank you, Mr. Orson.
Thank you. And Mr. Solomon, I also want to thank you for coming tonight and making this presentation. I just want to try to synthesize a couple of these things, because I know we've talked about various models that seem at times like they're diverging, and this is just my vision. I want to make sure that this would be possible, at least. And it also relates to the timetable, because I have to say I'm a little concerned about the timetable that you just outlined, because I think, given that most people are on a June 30th year, that if you are getting to May, you are running up against that people have signed their contract. And now you can always sign people who are already in a contract. Every industry does that, so we're no different. Hopefully there's not a penalty for doing that if they leave their contract. But I think we have to acknowledge we're maybe a little compressed here, and I would encourage Elise to see, while not making shortcuts, because I do appreciate what you said, that maybe there's some things we can be doing somewhat in parallel, so that as we're, and this goes back to my synthesizing question, the community engagement piece, which is touching out in all quarters of the community and building that profile, that we can also be doing a lot of the legwork for reaching out and finding candidate pools, so that perhaps we're not in May interviewing candidates, but a little earlier. I just think I'm uncomfortable that we might not be interviewing candidates till May.
Can I speak to that for a second?
Yeah. Yes.
I agree. I don't think the timeline that I've described is an issue. So let me be clear on that. That being said, candidates won't wait for the community to chime in, because we haven't been named as a firm, and hopefully you're all charmed by my wisdom and brilliance and will make that selection. But people are calling already. You mentioned, will candidates be interested in here, sir? And people are calling already. People. I think 12 calls on Monday that I received. Hey, we heard you're going to be there. If you're doing it, I want to do it. And some of the districts that you mentioned that have demonstrated track records of success and people who have made their names in public education are among those people that are interested. So in terms of synthesizing, candidates aren't going to wait necessarily till we're done, but we won't be able to accurately speak to the wants and needs of the district as an individual system until all that is done. So while we receive their interest now and speak to it, or would speak to it if selected, we are very clear with folks that, hey, look, we don't know if you're the right fit for that until we go through the process.
So the other part, the larger part of what I really want to talk about whether this would work, which is, I get the community engagement piece, which is the kind of the broad, touching large segments and large numbers of the people to get their feedback on what the ideal candidate looks like, and hopefully synthesizing that in a way that ultimately we all have to agree to as the elected representatives, which doesn't seem to me to be incompatible with also having a community-driven committee, which is either a representative sample of those boxes on your page or some other variation that can, in concert with you, or be reviewing resumes and reducing the pool of candidates to something manageable for the board to look at, whether it's 8 or 10 or 12 or whatever that magic number is, at which point we would look at the subset. And again, really, that's really just a byproduct, seems to me, if I'm hearing about whether we just entrust you to do it, or we, as some of us, and I include myself, having a community-driven committee doing, the functioning would be the same. Who was doing it might be different, which is to get a manageable pool of candidates for the board to either interview or to further reduce to get to an interview pool. And then for us to make then the final critical decision, which is if we are trying to reduce ourselves all the way to a sole finalist, hear your opinion about having multiple, but that's sort of another point in which we then would make a decision. Does that all sound
It does, and again,
consistent with, because I just think we've gone off in tangents at times.
understood, and
Right.
again, this would be ultimately a board decision to make.
Right.
But the thing that I would want to caution the board is, if I were to call a candidate and tell a candidate, a high-quality candidate, that your resume was going to be in the wind for X amount of time with people who are not part of the decision-making body, it would cause pause, and not overcomable pause, because the board will decide on a process that works for the board. But I do know that if I were to explain to a candidate that I was going to turn the totality of resumes over to an external committee and not the Board of Education for vetting and consideration, it would cause additional conversation.
But you've done those searches. That's listed right here about Cleveland and El Paso and Memphis, Shelby County. So clearly you've had, it seems to me, positive experiences.
And I've cautioned about the pause each time.
Right. But would you conclude that these have been successful searches?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, but I feel it's my responsibility to call out the pause.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
You mentioned Florida. You mentioned Florida.
I said something about the universities there use a practice in which they have 3 finalists, and I know when I was growing up there that.
But sunshine laws in Florida that if you apply, you're immediately part of
Right.
the public domain. And boards ask all the time, will that influence our candidate pool? And I think it's disingenuous to say, no, absolutely not. It causes pause. And so that's the word I like to use, because that's the moment of silence on the phone that I get where they go,
Mr. McMahon?
Thank you, Chair. And I'll be quick, which is, you've done your due diligence on DeKalb. Give me a couple of highlights of our strengths and our weaknesses, and how you would address our weaknesses to candidates. Number 2 is our communities and community engagement want to be acknowledged, that their voice is being heard. Real quick, how do you validate their input? Is it, because we've been to, every person here has been to community engagement sessions regarding numerous topics, and there's a lot of confusion at times, there's a lot of concern, there's much communication. It goes on for hours. And at the end of it, I'd like to hear how you present that data back to the community, that their voice is
heard.
Yeah, heard, it's verified. Yep, that's exactly what we're talking about. Take the ball and run with it.
So can I answer the second question first?
Yeah.
So how do we make, I think it's, again, I used the word disingenuous just a moment ago. I think it's disingenuous to say, hey, tell me what you think, and then you don't represent that in your boards or our thinking. So one of the things, we create 2 drafts, and at the end of February is where that fit in the timeline. We would create a pretty monumental stakeholder engagement report that we submit to the board for consideration that shapes the position profile. It gives an executive level summary and a very detailed data point breakdown of everything we heard in the community, and we make sure we call that out in the position profile so they could see not only is it recorded and part of the public domain and the public record that we're submitting this to you as a working document, but then also that the position profile is reflective of their wants and needs that were identified in those meetings. So they have all the data points and then the final byproduct of those data points. Strengths and weaknesses, I think there's been some tumultuous times. I think to provide the opportunity of stability of leadership and really digging in to overall school improvement and district-wide improvement is a rich opportunity for candidates as they see. I think the greater geographic area that you sit in that's very passionate and committed to public education, I think that's a big selling point for the district. I think it's going to be a new board. I just met one of the new board members who's coming on in January. I think some stability at the board level, I think will speak very favorably to candidates. In terms of concerns, was that the last part of your question? Challenges are relative. Every district is tough. I wish I could tell you 5 districts that weren't. Good candidates will do their due diligence on the district and be able to ask us questions that if we don't know the answer, we could come to you and get the answers to. I don't see challenges. I see discussions. We'll have to learn more. You'll have to learn more. They'll have to learn more. But there never seems to be a deal-breaking thing that we've lost candidates to. Are there tough times? Is there a track record of behavior and performance in the district that will willingly and wantingly address? Sure. But if you look at Ferguson, and that's an example I'm very proud of. I mean, when we walked into Ferguson to have this conversation, there was militia in the street. And I literally, we pulled up in the car, and I turned to my colleague, and I said, you first. And he did very willingly, and I ran closely behind him. And when we left there, I said, I really like the board. I really like what we're hearing about their commitment to public education. But you turn on CNN, you read Time Magazine, you read every national publication, and that's not what you're hearing about. And I felt very validated yesterday. Arnie Duncan went to Ferguson and made a very public display of support for their district. And I think that's representative of what we found in our candidates, that sure, they had questions. There were moments of pause among that about the challenges for they as educational leaders or their family in that community. But people were very committed and convinced that they could do a great job moving their schools to the next level of performance.
Thank you very much. After Mr. Mayfield's question, at that time, I will ask the board, what is the next step? I will ask the board what is the next step to take, whether or not we will hire the search firm or whether or not we end the discussion and make no decision, whatever the board wishes in that regard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That was actually a great segue for my question. If selected, given our interest that you've heard in a collaborative, we'll call it search support committee, and DeKalb's unique circumstance, what would you recommend to prepare for your engagement, the top 3 things we need to do to prepare to engage you?
Agree on roles and responsibilities. Agree on timeline. And begin to think of individually and globally what you all are looking for in your next superintendent. And if I could add a 4th, who your thought partners in the community need to be for this very important process.
Okay. Did you finish?
Yes.
Mr. Mayfield? Okay.
At your behalf, just real quick, tie it back into the communication, and this is back to Dr. Alonso. Tell me, please, why Proact felt Dr. Alonso was a good fit for Baltimore City's schools and their challenges, and please elaborate or to go as deep as you want to, but tell me the challenges that they had and why he was a good fit for that system.
Dr. Alonso at the time was number 2A in New York City. He worked under Joel Klein as the chancellor of New York City, and they had broken down their district into networks and given a rich amount of freedom and autonomy to their building level principals, both academically and financially. One of the things that the Board of Education in Baltimore really liked was the network structure that had been done successfully in New York. They really transformed authority in the district at the building level, financially and academically. And Dr. Alonso, if you look at the standing reforms that stay after he left, the network situation is still up. They have school-based budgeting. They have a pretty unique teacher contract that he negotiated, all of which were founded in the roots of the work that he did in New York. I think also he had no real ties to Baltimore. And they had a rich slate of talented folks in Baltimore to consider. But I think to make tough decisions on personnel, they needed somebody who wasn't entrenched in the history of the school district. And I think he turned over a great majority of the principals when he arrived and set up new accountability frameworks and a new network structure. And he really diversified his talent base at the school level. And they did a very similar thing to that in New York. I think in terms of an accountability system, if you look at around the country, one of the most successful accountability system, Dr. Liebman, who they brought into New York City to set that up with Dr. Alonso, they had a really fluid yet tangible accountability system that he enacted in Baltimore also that allowed them to outperform the state every year he was there.
What was the largest demographics of the Baltimore City's school population,
They were primarily African American.
percentage-wise?
Can't speak to that.
Over 50%?
Yeah, I could send it to you.
And Dr. Alonso's nationality and heritage?
He's Latino superintendent.
Thank you very much, Mr. Solomon. This concludes your portion of the presentation. I want to thank, on behalf of the Board of Education, I want to thank Mr. Solomon for your presentation tonight. It was very thorough and certainly good questions, and you responded to the best of your knowledge, and we appreciate that very much.
Thank you very much.
At this time, if it's the board's desire to take any action at all, I call for a motion to amend the agenda to add as an action item to approve the hiring of Proact search firm.
Here, I'll make a motion. I'll move that the Board of Education amend the December 17, 2014 called meeting agenda to include an action item for the purpose of hiring the superintendent search firm.
Is that moved by Mr. McMahon, second by Dr. Irwin? Is there any discussion? Mr. Coleman.
So I think
Do you want me to step out?
It's fine if you do.
We're good.
what I guess first is a procedural question. Will we have any discussion after that, or is this kind of the final opportunity for discussion to the chair?
Well,
Questions?
this is the discussion. If you, unless the board seeks otherwise, I want to do what the wish. Yes, I'm sorry.
I'll hold my comment.
You hold your comment. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Carter.
Okay, we're finished with the discussion on adding the item, but because that's the the motion, and we at the discussion stage now call for the vote. It's unanimous that we will amend the agenda. Now I call for a motion to hire a search firm.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the Board of Education approves the hiring of the Proact search firm.
Moved by Dr. Marley, second by Mr. Campbell. Is there any discussion? Now we're in the discussion stage.
So I'll just offer this comment now. So first, I was very impressed by the presentation today. I think the credentials were quite good. I think your ability to speak to specific instances that, while nothing is directly comparable to what we face in DeKalb, obviously it's unique, certainly encompass many of the range of challenges that we face and exhibit many of the same characteristics. And I did appreciate your openness to kind of exploring different formats with us as we formulate a search process. You have a perspective, which I think is good. I also appreciated the flexibility and the willingness to kind of talk to your perspective without, while being open to consideration of other paths. As I listen to the discussion, so I actually am in favor of approving the motion. I think the comment I would end with, since this is our opportunity to kind of talk about the process tonight, and I'll have limited opportunities to do that moving forward. I think as we've talked about it, I do see the benefit in two things. One is I do like the broader community engagement. I'm glad that we're going to do that up front, and I think that doing that up front so that we get proper feedback on the characteristics of the superintendent is good. To some of the earlier comments, I have some hesitations about bringing all 3 or 4 finalists in for a public engagement, because I know that would give me pause if I were one of those finalists, for example, and so I would want to explore that a lot more deeply before that were the path, because I know that could certainly deter some people, and it could lead to unintended consequences for us. So I would personally caution us to be very careful about that approach. In addition to the community engagement up front, I would still propose that I think it would be helpful if the board partnered with a smaller group of leaders in our community who have been either in executive leadership positions or who have been in the capacity of hiring executive leaders before, in similar contexts, but not the same context, so nonprofits, universities, et cetera. I think that this idea of partnering with a set of community leaders who can at least help advise the board once we get to finalists or in the narrowing process. To your point, I don't know that I would send out 80 resumes to a lot of people, but intelligently having a smaller group of people, 10 or less, partner with the board as we select. I just think we could really use that counsel and advisement, particularly from senior leaders who have either served in similar positions or who have consulted on those, been through search processes before, et cetera. So as we've talked, those are just a few takeaways that I would have, and I think that's something we've heard from a lot of members of the community. That said, I think that, I thought you guys could be the right folks to partner with as we sort through that.
Dr. Morley?
Mr. Chairman, I thought we had this discussion before. And if we're going to hire a search firm and we're going to follow process, procedures, and protocol to be able to put this all together, most certainly we have to engage. But as we start getting different factions and different committees here and there has to be a place for a committee to be held and be a part of this. The reason of hiring a search firm is to do just what they're going to do, is to search. And it has been stipulated and stated as to where this committee would be. I think that we would be going down a previous path. I think it will become too unwielding. I think it will be too unmanageable. And then it comes down to, well, who are these people you're going to put here? I think that we have to begin to look at setting some standards and keeping the integrity not only of the process, but of the people, as Mr. Solomon said, that you're trying to bring in or recruit, and protecting them as they're still out there, many of them in jobs. But I think that there has to be a place, and we cannot have an aside. In that case, the board might as well do its own search, have this committee, and go ahead, and we don't need Mr. Solomon here anymore. We don't need a firm anymore. I think that we have to be realistic about what our role is, stay in our lanes, and make sure that we do what is necessary. But each time we bring these various factions in, it only makes it more heightened. I think that we have to recognize what is the place and where should this committee be. And I think it has been quite well put as to where this engagement should take place. And I really believe that we need to follow. And we've had this discussion at board meetings before, and we keep revisiting the same thing over and over again. We say we want to move with the process, but then I have to begin to ask the question, what is the benefit, and what are we trying to do, and who are we trying to satisfy?
Thank you, Dr. Morley. Mr. Mayfield?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I would support, or certainly hope that the board would consider a collaborative search committee to work with the board. I think it's important on a number of levels, both some of the points that Mr. Coleman pointed out in terms of executive hire experience, but also I think because of the unique situation in which the CAB is in, I think in order for the next superintendent to be successful, and I think we've seen this in our past, we're going to have, I think, some rather high-stake holders, high-level stakeholders in the community to help make the superintendent successful. And because of that, and because of the need for, I'm going to call an objective level of transparency for the community, I think it would also be helpful to have a few high-level stakeholders to participate in this process, to help the public be very comfortable not only with the process, but also with the post-hire engagement of the community.
Mr. McMahon?
Thank you, Chair. Did you bring a copy of your book with you?
I didn't, but it could be here by 10:30 tomorrow morning.
Okay. I'd love to read it, and I hadn't had a chance to see it. Me personally, I've never hired a superintendent before. I am very open that I am not an expert really in anything except for maybe financial services is what I've done for my entire adult life. But I think I do have the ability to surround myself with people who are specialists and experts, and I rely on their expertise to help guide me in things that I don't necessarily know, but they know. So fortunately for us and our board, we have 2 members of our board who are in higher education, Dr. Irwin and Dr. Carter. And even though they haven't been, I may be mistaken, have y'all hired any superintendent? My question is, who does the hiring at y'all's universities for your leadership? And so that's my first question to y'all.
It depends on where you are engaged. In the private sector, you go through a search process, as we discussed at the prior board meeting, and the search committee is established by the Board of Trustees, which is similar to what we are, the board of this system, and they invite stakeholders, students, alumni, community leaders, business leaders, just as this organization has proposed in the package they provided. In the university system, the USG, the Board of Regents also establishes a search process in most instances, and in that search process, they engage members of the college or university in particular, community stakeholders, business leaders. If you want something to look at as a nice model, if you're asking about USG, which Dr. Irwin and I both come from, Columbus State University is currently under search. They just announced that, and that process looks very similar to what Proact has proposed for us in a superintendency, not to have an external organization or committee of experts, as important as that is, lead and guide us.
Right.
It is clear that the role and the responsibility and the fiduciary legal obligations sit with the board. They
Right.
sit with the Board of Regents.
Right.
And the USG system, they sit with the Board of Trustees in a private institution. They sit with the DeKalb County Board of Education. But recognizing the value in having those who are going to be served be a part of the conversation. All searches that I've been a part of, and I've been a part of 2 presidential searches, include the community much in the way that Proact has laid this dynamic out. And I think it's most appropriate for this region at this time to go off message and do something that's outside the standards that have been set in this region would suggest that we're operating outside the flow of education.
Thank you. And that's kind of
Mr. McMahon, can I just say something? And I have been a part of the hiring of the superintendent in the Rochester City School District on a couple of occasions. So as an educator for over 30 years and knowing that process, and this is a process that has been utilized in those cases.
And I rely on your wealth of experience. And thank you, Dr. Morley. The point I just wanted to, on your spreadsheet, I didn't see, I saw educational institutions, but I did not see kind of like in, so if you can expand on your experience in dealing with a state system, helping a K through 12 system, have you had that experience in collaboration where, I mean, hopefully the majority of our students are heading to higher ed. Some may not, and we understand that. But I think our collaboration with our university partners here in our state, they are reliant upon us to prepare our student population to be ready to fill the classrooms of our universities. So I'd like to hear your opinions.
Yeah, and the whole county idea adds a level of complexity as well. The county level, I think what we'll do is when we meet with you one-on-one is identify the appropriate people that we should be talking to on the local and county level as well as the statewide level. And it's not just traditional institutions of higher learning. If there are other avenues for young people, we want to involve those people in the conversation as well, because I think to think that all students here are going to a four-year school is putting down a path that's not going to get them to a true destination. I think you have to identify all opportunities for all kids to give them to get them college and career ready, and I think to involve all those voices in the conversation is important.
Mr. McMahon, I think that your question and the way you framed it is very well taken, as well as Mr. Solomon's response. One of the things that I think this district has done well, me as an educator, looking at the various committees that we have had throughout the history of DeKalb, has been the inclusion of traditional and non-traditional education. There's an extraordinary record, and so those partners, I think, are expected to invite them to the party.
Completely agree. Thank you for your input.
Mr. Orson?
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. So with regard to the selection of your firm, I don't think there's much debate. I think your presentation was very well done, and obviously you have a wealth of experience, and there are points I think that still require some sussing out and discussion. I think there are some of us on this board, obviously, that we have some division about the process and how the process should work. You know, I don't think what Mr. Coleman and Mr. Mayfield have talked about is incompatible, nor an abandonment of our fiduciary responsibility as the Board of Education. I think what we have been talking about is empowering some proxies for us that may also involve some current or former board members, if we were to follow that design, to do the initial sifting along with you, and about not as some external entity that resides, has no connectivity to the Board of Education, but simply, I think, recognizes a few things. One, as has been touched about, some of the unique circumstances we are finding ourselves in DeKalb as we have begun to emerge from really a crisis situation to one where we are beginning to see some stability. To be mindful, not to be hostage to it, of our history. I mean, our last few searches, and Mr. Thurman was here. We love the hiring Mr. Thurman, and Jim, you were involved in the superintendent hiring. We should not forget about our superintendent.
Yes, we were.
But that, you know, that was a crisis. You know, all of a sudden our superintendent was gone, and we needed to find a superintendent, and we were fortunate to find Mr. Thurman, who was available. But in our searches before that, we had some hiccups, quite frankly, from kind of the beauty pageant that didn't quite go so well for us in one go-round, in which every candidate ended up not being selected, to the process in which I think the public felt disengaged, not just in that hiring, but in some previous hiring. So I certainly think there's a way to harmonize all this, you know, and the language that's been used by some of my colleagues about partnering with a committee, if that gives people more comfort. I think we need that buy-in. I think we need kind of the profiling and the development of the characteristics that comes from the broad community, because I think that's a community-based conversation that's really important to have. And I think it's critical that we conduct that conversation in a way that people feel that it's substantive and meaningful. And I mean, from people in other systems, you have been given high marks, your organization, for being able to create that kind of dialogue. Because we've had a history where some of our interaction with the public hasn't always felt great to the public when they leave. And so I think we would welcome that expertise and experience. I don't think that's incompatible then with having a committee of high-profile community leaders who partner with us to help us and work with you to reduce the pool of candidates to something manageable for us to make the ultimate decision, which is our responsibility on behalf of the public. And again, putting aside whether we go to the beauty pageant multiple finalists or sole finalists, that's something we can work through this process. But I do think it's important. I think we're at a critical juncture. We're rebuilding public trust, and I think if you sampled across all of DeKalb, that this, in a refreshing way, is not an issue that reduces itself or a viewpoint to one section of our county or another, that the correspondence I think all of us have received has formed, like some of them may have been, because that's the tendency of this. I think there has been a consistent and widespread, widely dispersed message from across the county that they would like a subset of the community to have a more active role in the vetting and selection process, knowing full well that the board is ultimately responsible for the final decision.
Thank you very much. I want to make sure that I'm very clear in interpreting and understanding what I'm hearing, because when we leave here tonight, I don't want any uncertainty about what we voted on and how we voted. First of all, I want to make sure I'm perfectly clear, and if I'm wrong, I want the board members to correct me, please. What I hear and the model that Mr. Solomon gave us tonight and explained, in my opinion, explains everything that we all have been talking about. Not to exclude any of the pertinent leaders, whatever title you want to give those individuals, whether or not it's college professors or business leaders in the community, the Chamber of Commerce. I would expect all of these representatives to be in this community engagement. And I like Mr. Solomon's term. He didn't call it a committee because that committee has confused this whole DeKalb County. Because everywhere you go, everybody's talking about a committee. In reality, these are community people and stakeholders who are going to be, according to us and with our direction and the search firm's direction, will add these individuals to this community engagement group. Below that, unless I'm seeing something wrong, then the model goes down into the community, and I like the part wherein we have these individuals linking to every part of our community. Now, how we organize that to some degree. Now, the authority that the community engagement group will have is what I'm hearing everybody saying. They will have the same authority other than the fact of bringing one candidate back to the board. What I like about it and what I'm hearing and what I see here is the board and Proact will be involved in the total process. However, the community engagement group will be used as a vehicle in an engagement process to engage and ensure that each part of the community is involved in the process. And the bottom line, I want to make sure I'm perfectly clear that whatever happens in the process, the Board of Education will have the final, at least the final 3 candidates to actually vote on or make a determination from that process. Now, am I wrong in making that assumption?
Just as a point of clarity for me,
Right.
as I understood the discussion, that everything that you've said are things that the board will make a decision on. The motion on the table is to hire, whether or not we hire the firm, not whether or not we have, as a part of that motion, deciding what the committee would, what a support committee would look like. So I just want to make sure that we're clear that we're voting on hiring search firm, not on the final structure of the search process.
You're exactly correct. However, I was going to define that, but what I hear, and I was falling off and really reacting to what I had heard in terms, because you're not going to confuse me, because if I'm confused, the community going to be confused, and the terminology and the semantics that we use in here, I want to make sure that the community understands that.
Right.
That's the only thing that I'm saying. Now,
I
we will
agree.
be, at the appropriate time, we're going to finish this discussion. Then we will get back to, one, vote on the issue. But in voting for the firm, I want to make sure that we are voting and not what they call the fine print, what they call in the state, in the Senate and Congress, where they hide words and come back later on and say, well, I meant this.
Right.
I don't want that to occur, because
Don't
as
don't
chair,
confuse
it's
us.
important. Huh? Don't confuse us. Right, okay. Dr. Carter, you had a comment.
Dr. Johnson, then, am I understanding that we need to amend the motion to approve the selection of this firm inclusive of the framework as they have proposed it in their RFQ? I'm asking a question.
I think so. That's from my
Discussion.
perspective, so it would be clear. That's from my perspective. Yes.
That is my understanding too. Again, we go back. Yeah, that's my understanding. Again, I go back to, we're constantly bringing in professionals. And we do it at this level with the administrative team here in the district. We do it all the time. We have professionals who are experts that we have engaged to put together a process that will allow us to do what needs to be done. And it really incensed me that throughout this whole process, there are all these clarifiers, and we want to change it and make it be what we personally want, however we want it to be done. If you're going to have the firm, again, I'm going to go back and say, and you're going to, we're supposed to be here to make sure that the process is one that we can actually get done what we need to get done. But we still have some things, and I've asked a question even at the last board meeting. Help me to understand, why do we keep bringing in, but then we want to make it be what we want it to be personally or otherwise? Or who are we doing this for? If we're doing it for all boys and girls, at some point, this board has got to stop delaying things, and you have a process here on paper that is not just something thrown together. We've asked the pertinent questions. We've seen that this firm has been all over the country. We've brought up the Atlanta public stuff. We know what was going on there. And we have something, but there's some who are just bent on having everybody in. You cannot have everyone from top to bottom being in a process throughout. It's going to actually muddy the waters. And we know before Mr. Thurman some of the mistakes that were made before. And I will not be a part of this board that does this injustice to the boys and girls in the DeKalb County school system, nor to the taxpayers and other stakeholders, because of whatever else is out there that we're trying to accomplish by having a group that we want to choose to be a part of this process. We have the firm. The firm has laid out that there will be engagement, and I think that whole process, it lists everything that's here. Mr. McMahon has clarified. What do we mean by education institutions? Well, that can be K through 12, it can be higher ed, it can be whatever. But I think later that could be wrestled out. But I think the whole thing that's stopping this is some of us want to be able to have our own group of people that we want to be up front from top to bottom who's making the decision. I go back again and say, then why don't we let Mr. Solomon go? Why don't we let the board do what it needs? And the board should not be a part of going through 80 applications and doing that. That's why we have a search firm. Again, we're out of our lane. We're not here to be attorneys, not here to be other roles that we're supposed to be. We're board members, and we're not working in the best interest of our children if we keep trying to infuse our personal wants and wishes into this.
Mr. Orson.
So, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate your explanation, but the only motion before the body right now, I would advise that we limit it to this, is the motion to hire the firm. Proact. The other issues, the procedural issues, the process issues, whether we create some
But
sort
you're
of
the one
committee.
brought it up. You brought it up.
No. I
Marcia.
wanted to synthesize. No. I asked the question to understand from whether they could work in that endeavor. The motion before our body is simply, and I think it would be advisable to keep it simple for the moment, is whether we hire Proact as our search firm. The other elements you've described, clearly there is requires, I think, some further discussion and exploration and learning, but for the moment, I think the pressing business and the only motion before the body is yes or no, do we hire Proact? And my suggestion would be we keep it at that for the moment, and then we can continue the dialogue tonight or go into the future about the other elements of it.
Well,
Chair, I call the question.
Call it question in terms of the vote. Do we want to add your amendment to?
No, she's called the question. You can't amend.
He's asking for clarity of what I've asked, and I think he's entitled to do that.
Right.
There wasn't a second on it, so there
no,
can't be.
I'm just calling the question, sir.
No, you can't.
So the question is,
The hire or not?
Right, to hire or not, that's correct.
all in favor?
Well, Doctor, I just want, and I agree with what you're doing, but you actually, I think, have to ask the body, and 2/3 of us have to agree to pose the question if anybody still wanted to talk. If nobody else wants to talk, then we can proceed to a vote under the Robert's Rules of Order.
Can we get
As long as
clarity
nobody
on
else wants to talk, we can
parliamentary
call.
procedure, please?
If you want to amend the motion that's on the table.
No, there's no. She called the
Calling the question, I think it bears repeating what the question is, so everyone is clear on what you're voting on.
But just to clarify, as long as nobody else wants to speak, then we don't have to vote. If you call the question, though, and there was anybody else that would speak, Robert's Rules of Order requires a 2/3 vote of the body to call the question. It does.
Up or down? I call it. You can either vote it up.
It's time to vote on the motion.
Right.
Okay. All in favor? All in favor? Let me know by show of hands.
Favor of.
In favor of hiring Proact.
Okay.
All in favor? Let me know by show of hand. It's unanimous. Proact, you're hired.
Congratulations, Chair.
Thank you, sir.
That's your request, permission?
Huh?
Yes. Can I have a quick question?
Go ahead, and followed by Dr. Marley.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Mayfield had asked previously about the 3 points, and then you added a fourth point. It's kind of like our homework. That's my layman's speak. Can you reiterate those 4 points for the board to discuss or think about and obtain clarity before our next, I think is before the next time we talk to you? Is that what?
Absolutely. The first thing is to agree on timeline, to agree on process, to start to think about traits and characteristics and skill sets you want in the next superintendent.
Karen.
And I'll write all this up for you, sir. And to consider thought partners. Thought partners in the community. Who should we be engaging with?
Thank you, Mr. Solomon. I, as Vice Chair, and Dr. Morley, I'll recognize you right after I congratulate you.
Thank you.
Welcome to DeKalb.
Thank you.
The water's fine. Dr. Morley? Nothing further? And
I move to-
Mr. Coleman, and then Dr. Irwin.
I move to adjourn the meeting.
Chair?
At this time, I call for motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Coleman, second by Dr. Irwin. Is there any discussion? Hearing none for a change. Call for the vote. We are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sullivan.